Some captains lead with speeches, some lead with tactics, but Tony Adams led with fear, authority, and an intensity that could mentally break players around him. In the brutal world of 1990s English football, Adams was not just Arsenal's captain, he was the emotional engine of an entire defensive empire built on discipline, pain, and absolute commitment. Every time he stepped onto the pitch, teammates knew excuses would not be tolerated, weakness would not be hidden, and mistakes would be exposed immediately. He screamed orders like a battlefield commander, demanded perfection from everyone around him, and carried himself like a man willing to sacrifice everything for victory. But what made his leadership even more terrifying was the fact that while he controlled Arsenal with iron authority on the pitch, he was secretly fighting personal demons off it. Alcohol addiction, emotional pressure, and inner chaos followed him throughout his career, yet somehow he still became one of the most respected captains in football history. This is the story of the brutal leadership of Tony Adams, the captain who ruled Arsenal through fear, discipline, and pain. Tony Adams was not the kind of captain who tried to be everyone's friend. He came from an era of football where leadership meant confrontation, discipline, and emotional toughness rather than motivation speeches or media-friendly behavior. When Adams walked into the dressing room, players immediately felt his presence because he carried himself with the intensity of someone who expected absolute commitment at all times. He believed football was built on sacrifice, pain, and responsibility, and anyone who failed to match those standards would hear about it instantly. In the brutal environment of 1990s English football, softness was viewed as weakness, and Adams became the perfect symbol of that ruthless mentality. To many teammates, he was inspiring. To opponents, he was intimidating. And to Arsenal itself, he became the heart of an entire football identity built on fearlessness and defensive power. From a very young age, Adams understood that survival in English football required mental strength just as much as talent. Arsenal during the late 1980s and early 1990s was filled with experienced, hard-working players who valued toughness above everything else. To earn respect in that environment, Adams could not afford hesitation or insecurity. He developed into a centre-back who treated every match like a personal war, throwing himself into tackles, screaming instructions constantly, and demanding focus from every teammate around him. Even before becoming captain, people inside the club already recognised that he carried natural authority. His voice was loud, his standards were unforgiving, and his competitive mentality separated him from almost everyone else in the squad. One of the most brutal aspects of Adams's leadership was his complete rejection of excuses. If a teammate failed to track back, lost concentration, or avoided physical battles, Adams reacted immediately and aggressively. He would shout across the pitch, publicly criticize mistakes, and force players to stay mentally sharp for the full 90 minutes. Modern football dressing rooms are often carefully managed to protect player confidence, but Adams belonged to a generation where humiliation and confrontation were considered necessary tools of leadership. He believed pressure created stronger players, and he treated every mistake like something that could cost the entire team victory. That relentless demand for accountability made Arsenal one of the most disciplined sides in English football. As a central defender, Adams controlled Arsenal's defensive line with almost military authority. He constantly organised positioning, directed movement, and screamed instructions to maintain perfect defensive shape. Teammates did not question him because they understood he saw himself as the commander of the backline. During matches, his voice echoed through the stadium as he ordered defenders forward, pulled midfielders back into position, and warned teammates about danger before it developed. He did not politely communicate, he commanded. The famous Arsenal defensive identity of the 1990s depended heavily on Adams' obsession with structure and discipline because he refused to allow chaos or laziness anywhere near his back four. That defensive partnership with players like Lee Dixon, Nigel Winterburn, and Steve Bold became legendary because they operated almost like soldiers following a strict battlefield system. Arsenal defenders moved together, pressed together, and held their line with incredible precision because Adams demanded perfection constantly. Opponents often became frustrated trying to break through Arsenal's organised structure because every defender trusted Adams completely. He transformed discipline into intimidation. Teams entering matches against Arsenal Arsenal already knew they would face relentless physical battles, aggressive communication, and defenders who refused to show weakness for even a second. But what made Tony Adams different from many other captains was the fact that he led not only through authority, but through visible sacrifice. He played through injuries, exhaustion, and emotional pressure without showing vulnerability publicly. In that era, football culture admired players who ignored pain, and Adams became one of the strongest examples of that mentality. Teammates watched him continue fighting during difficult matches, even when his body looked physically broken. He expected others to push themselves because he demanded the exact same thing from himself. That willingness to suffer for the team created enormous respect inside Arsenal's dressing room and strengthened his authority even further. Behind the scenes, however, Adams was fighting a battle far more dangerous than football itself. While captaining Arsenal and maintaining the image of an unstoppable leader, he struggled heavily with alcohol addiction off the pitch. The pressure of leadership, fame, and personal issues slowly consumed him emotionally, yet very few people truly understood the pain he was hiding internally. Football supporters saw a fearless captain commanding Arsenal's defense every weekend, but privately, Adams was dealing with chaos that threatened to destroy both his career and personal life. The contrast between his public strength and private suffering made his story even more powerful and tragic. At the height of his struggles, Adams's addiction became impossible to hide completely. He faced legal problems, emotional breakdowns, and moments where his football future looked uncertain. Many players would have collapsed under that pressure, especially while carrying the responsibility of captaining one of England's biggest clubs. But Adams somehow continued performing at the highest level despite everything happening around him. That ability to endure suffering while still leading Arsenal created a near mythical reputation among teammates and fans. People respected him, not because he was perfect, but because he kept fighting through personal destruction without abandoning his responsibilities. The brutality of Adams's leadership also extended into Arsenal's training ground culture. Training sessions during the 1990s were aggressive, demanding, and emotionally intense because senior players expected maximum effort every single day. Adams helped maintain that atmosphere by refusing to tolerate laziness or weak mentality from younger players entering the squad. Young footballers quickly learned that respect inside Arsenal had to be earned through hard work, physical courage, and discipline. If someone lacked focus during training, Adams would confront them directly without hesitation. His leadership style was uncomfortable at times, but it created a mentality of accountability throughout the entire club. Modern football captains are often calmer, media-trained, and emotionally controlled, but Adams belonged to a completely different generation. He represented a time when captains ruled dressing rooms through personality, confrontation, and visible toughness rather than public image management. Today, some people would probably criticize his aggressive leadership methods, but during the 1990s, those qualities made him legendary. Football culture respected strong personalities, capable of controlling chaotic environments, and Adams mastered that role perfectly throughout his career. He became the embodiment of Arsenal's fighting spirit during one of the toughest eras in English football history. Even now, decades later, Tony Adams remains one of the most respected captains English football has ever seen because his story represents far more than trophies or defensive skill alone. He symbolized endurance, accountability, discipline, and emotional resilience in a brutally demanding sport. Fans remember the screaming commands, the fearless tackles, and the ruthless standards he imposed on everyone around him. But they also remember the pain he carried privately while still refusing to abandon his responsibilities as Arsenal's leader. That combination of brutality and vulnerability made him unforgettable. For Arsenal supporters, Adams will always represent the soul of the club's old defensive empire, a captain who demanded everything from himself and everyone around him. He led through fear, sacrifice, confrontation, and relentless standards that shaped an entire generation of football at Arsenal. His leadership style was not soft, modern, or comfortable. It was brutal, emotional, and uncompromising. But in the rage, violent, and unforgiving world of 1990s football, that was exactly what made Tony Adams one of the greatest leaders the game had ever seen.